Welcome to the Menstruality podcast, where we share inspiring conversations about the power of menstrual cycle awareness and conscious menopause. This podcast is brought to you by Red School, where we're training the menstruality leaders of the future. I'm your host, Sophie Jane Hardy, and I'll be joined often by Red School's founders, Alexandra and Shani, as well as an inspiring group of pioneers, activists, changemakers, and creatives to explore how you can unashamedly claim the power of the menstrual cycle to activate your unique form of leadership for yourself, your community, and the world. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, for being part of the community gathered around this conversation. I loved the chat that I had for this episode today. It's with a woman called Jules Alma. She's a birth doula and a menstrual coach. And for a decade, she has been mapping her yoni. It has helped her to soothe and regulate her nervous system, helped to heal her pain during sex, and brought her back to her center, back to her core. And she even uses it as a practice after attending a birth to regulate her nervous system after the intensity of the experience. So if you haven't come across this word, yoni is the Sanskrit word referring to our vaginas and vulvas. And in our conversation, we track the history of the practice of yoni mapping, from Taoism in ancient China to Tantra in ancient India to modern day pelvic physiotherapy. And Jules shares the story of how she was at war with her body and her yoni for years, pushing past her boundaries, experiencing tons of different health symptoms, feeling pain during sex. Then she began to reclaim her rites of passage as a woman and learn how to map her yoni. And in the conversation, she talks about how healing it can be on all levels to create a more intimate relationship with this part of our bodies. Jules is also a graduate of the Red School Menstruality Leadership Program, and it was beautiful to hear some of her story about how the course helped her to live her calling, which is to guide women to find healing and joy through the way they bleed, birth, pleasure, and nourish their bodies. So, Jules, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Thank you so much for making the time to be with me and with us today.
Thank you so much. It really is an honor and really exciting to get to kind of have a full circle moment back in the Red School world.
So yeah, talking of Red School, you're a graduate of the Menstruality Leadership Program, which we'll talk about later. So cycle awareness is a really big part of your life. And I would love, let's just get right into a deep cycle check-in. I'd love to hear, how's your cycle feeling? How are you doing on this cycle day? Yeah, how's it influencing you?
Yeah, so I am currently on cycle day 24, or sorry, 23. That's a perfect example of where I'm at. And well, I've had a wonderful inner summer phase, actually. And I think maybe I've partied a little too hard. And my body has sent me into a roaring halt as I've transitioned into autumn. I actually broke my toe 2 days ago. So, whatever you believe with divine timing and stuff, for me, it's like I got a very clear message that it's time to slow down. And now my internal world is definitely shifting towards that as well. This is probably the last day I'll feel up for having a conversation of this length with someone else. I feel the introversion really starting to set in. I feel some of the friction with my partner starting to set in, which is typical for me in my inner autumn phase. And it's the start of summer here in Austin, Texas, which is where I'm based. So I still haven't quite gotten the hang of enjoying my inner autumn and winter when it's summer here in Austin, because our summers are so intense, so hot, and so sunny. So I often feel like at odds in the world with the outer season and my inner season. But overall, I do feel deep down a good sense of settling into this period as I begin getting closer to my bleed and I'm ready to fully go into my cave and rest.
And you just shared with me you're a doula and you have 5 births coming up sometime over the next 6 weeks. We never quite know when they're going to come. I mean, we're talking about yoni mapping today, but I'm just curious, as when you're in the depths of your inner autumn and inner winter, is it a different doulaing experience than when you're in your inner spring and inner summer? Does that shift, or do you just find yourself in in the flow of it, no matter where you are in your cycle?
Honestly, it's a bit of both. So I used to fear that a little bit when I first became a doula, and I was also new and kind of really honing the awareness of my inner cycle. And I used to fear, like, well, what if I'm just right gobsmack in the middle of the void or my bleed, and I get called to this birth, and I have to hold space and support this, woman, this birthing mother, and am I really going to be able to show up the way that I want to? And of course, with years of experience, that has happened multiple times now. And it is truly a balance of first just kind of conjuring up the inner strength and groundedness that I always have in my reserves, to be able to show up for my client in the way that I want to. And also appreciating that I kind of bring a different set of skills and gifts and just space holding abilities depending on where I am in my cycle. So I do kind of enjoy when I'm kind of in the range of like transitioning from summer to autumn to be called to births, because I'm starting to become a little bit more serious and just like that autumn grounding, but I still have a little bit of the fire of summer in me. And so I feel like I really show up as a fierce and solid advocate for the woman I'm working with.
Oh, they're so lucky to have you as a cycle aware doula. It's amazing. I'm sorry about your toe. Did that happen in some amazing party situation?
I wish. I I literally I just stubbed it walking to my kitchen on the leg of our trampoline. And I looked down and it was clearly broken. And so began my period of 6 weeks that I'm supposed to be resting my foot.
Oh, love. It's so bizarre because honestly, the amount of times I've stubbed my toe on day 22, then 23, like in that window, it's just like you say, is it that I haven't quite heeded the call to slow down? And my body goes thunk, right, now you need to slow down. But it's a harsh way to have to do it.
It really does feel exactly like that.
Yeah. I'm in inner autumn too, but this is vulnerable to share, but I'm going to share it because I'm in space with you and this community is so understanding. But there's always a possibility that I'm pregnant and I would just, I'd love to be pregnant again. And, I just share that for the people in our community who are in whatever part of whatever kind of messy motherhood or not becoming a mother experience that they might be in, just to share some togetherness, some vulnerability, it's hard to talk about these things in public because they're so tender and yeah, but that's where I am. Wonderful community around this podcast. And thank you for being a safe space where I can share that. And, we'll see what happens.
That's really beautiful to bring up because I'm sure we'll get more into this later in our conversation. But when you start to look at the map of the cycle, and I think it's like no coincidence that autumn is the waiting period to find out that we're pregnant or not, right? It's like contains a certain energy to it. And I mean, it's, yeah, the space holder of the cycle, at least for myself. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's holding the tension on multiple levels for, whether people want children or not, or are actively trying not to get pregnant, or that's so true. I've never really thought about it that way, that there's that always that tension, not always, but often that tension. Yeah. Hmm. And I am feeling autumnal, as in there's a genuine sense of joy to be with you talking about this in my inner autumn. This is exactly what I want to be doing with women, talking about cycles and yonis and vaginas and the sacred creative hubs in our bodies, so I can feel that fire in me. It's so much a part of my calling to honor this part of our bodies. I'd be curious to hear, just before we get onto the yoni mapping, if there's a kind of cycle edge that you're working with at the moment, if there's a particular inner season that is clunky for you that you're like journeying with. I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah, this I would love to answer this question. When I was going through the menstruality leadership program with the Red School, my big I don't want to say problem child, but yeah, my like clunky part of the cycle that I was working with was like many, my inner autumn and just so much friction and spiraling and my inner critic that was just felt really out of control. And I actually feel like I've made quite significant progress with that since I did my training and other work that I've done over the past few years. And currently, I think what really has come up for me is my inner summer, which I just it kind of goes to two extremes where I'm either just going so full and I don't know when to shut down the party. And I feel it bleed into the other parts of my cycle, pun intended. And or it's like I freeze in my inner summer and I can't quite get the like hop on the train that gives me the lift and energy that I know I naturally, need to exert to feel balanced out energetically again. And I've kind of been teeter-tottering between those two extremes for the past, I'd say like 6 months or so. And I think this is probably a natural experience of, you're someone that just has a business or you're more entrepreneurial and your business is starting to grow and more commitments are coming. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my current cycle endeavors.
Thank you. It's great to hear that. And I imagine being a doula, you're called upon so much. Like, you have to be able to switch on at really a minute's notice and just go and dive into your calling full on. So I think it's a beautiful and probably very intense calling that you're working with there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one with a lot of responsibility on different levels. Like, of course, there's all the responsibilities that come with supporting and working with another woman, and especially at this kind of time period in her life. But also, there's the responsibility that really intensifies to take care of yourself.
Mm.
And so I've met so many other birth workers, doulas, midwives, just anyone kind of in the birth world that it's just an industry that's really easy to burn out on because we all feel, of course, we all are in this work because we feel so passionate and lit up about supporting women in this way. And also, it's impossible to be there so deeply for every single client in the way that we want to be. And so there really is, like the cycle teaches us, you have to really learn how to protect your own reserves so that you can build yourself back up again to support. Otherwise, you're just going to continue working from a deficit.
Wow, that's so interesting. I could talk to you about that for a long time. But I imagine, like, through the yoni mapping lens, we can explore this because I imagine that practice is part of how you resource yourself or how you stay centered and grounded. So let's get into it. And I wondered if we could just start with the word yoni, because for some people that will mean a lot, and for some people it'll be like, oh, what's that? So I was just looking in Wikipedia earlier, and it's a Sanskrit word that's been interpreted to literally mean the womb or the source or the female organs of generation, and a few other things actually in like Hindu mythology. And here we're talking about yoni as in the sexual organs, the reproductive organs. Yeah. Do you want to just walk us into yoni, the world of yoni?
Yes, absolutely. No shame or worries at all if you've never heard the word yoni before, or if you've heard it and you're like, I don't know quite what that is. Yeah, so like Sophie said, it is a word from the Sanskrit language. And in modern day, it's kind of become a term that encompasses the entire vulva, vagina, cervix, uterus, like female sexual reproductive organ area. I really like to use it personally because for me, it's just when I hear the word yoni, I think of my external anatomy and my internal anatomy. And so it's all encompassing. I personally believe in, using the correct anatomical words for our body and, kind of overcoming any discomfort we have with that, because that's a beautiful practice in itself. And I also think the word yoni is really beautiful, especially with, that Sanskrit definition of it meaning, like the source, the portal to the gods. So yeah, that's kind of why it's become my word of choice for my body and my anatomy. But that's just one way to describe yourself.
Mm. I've told this story on the podcast before, but I just think it's so sweet and funny that I feel committed to sharing the correct anatomical terms with Artie, and he's completely like obsessed with the word vulva now. And I'm like, oh no, have I said too much? Because I was picking him up from nursery. He's 3.5, and in front of his nursery key worker. He said, Mummy, have you brought your vulva? And I said, yes, sweetie, yes, I've got it. And he said, good, good, because I've got my penis. And the nursery worker said, good, you're using the correct anatomical terms.
That's amazing. Yeah, the words without charge is so powerful. And then they come out, it kind of tests your own charge about them when they come out in these unexpected places.
Yeah, there's a story from Tammy Lynn Kent, who I know we'll talk about in this conversation, where she was at the supermarket and she was buying latex gloves because she uses gloves for her holistic pelvic care practice, where she's giving women vaginal massage. And her son, who was probably a similar age to Artie or a bit older, said, "My mummy touches vaginas," to the woman at the checkout. So beautiful to feel these boys growing up into this world. So yeah, yoni mapping. You shared with me that the history of it is, you said it's similar to meditation. It's been used throughout history in different cultural variations, Taoist practices of ancient China, Tantra temples of ancient India. Could you tell us a bit more about, yeah, the lineage and the history?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, like I said, with something like meditation, like most of us know of the practice of meditation in modern day, it's also had definitely a big resurgence, we could say, like in the last 30 years or so. And then there's all these different kind of like subcategories of meditation and different schools of philosophy about meditation. And, when we think about the original source or tracing back the lineage of meditation, we're like, okay, yeah, we know of evidence in history where this has been, what we could say begun or started in, some of the more Eastern countries and cultures, like China, like Indonesia. And we also see this in ancient India. But there isn't quite this like one person created this one practice at this one specific time in history. It's seen a lot of adaptations. And so yoni mapping is really similar, where most cultures, especially Eastern cultures throughout history, experience some sort of a period of sexual revolution. So the most commonly known ones being the Taoists in ancient India, and then most of us are really familiar with Tantra from ancient India.
So you said Taoist in ancient India, but you mean ancient China, right?
Oh, yes, thank
Yes.
you. Yeah, Taoism with ancient China, Tantra with ancient India. And so, with these two examples, there are texts that exist from these kind of like sexual revolutionary periods where, there's different essentially self-pleasure techniques is what most people have interpreted them to be today. But when you get into kind of schools of Tantra or schools of Taoism, we start seeing that certain kinds of touch techniques and massage that were captured and taught to people during these eras were actually kind of given as prescriptions for different, like whether it's like, oh, we're trying to amplify for fertility, a marriage or a union has happened, and they want to create a child right away, or a woman with menopausal symptoms who is experiencing what they understood at the time to be like symptoms of, her fertility or life force energy starting to decrease and wane. And there's lots of examples of this, including with the menstrual cycle too, of women experiencing, what were considered uncommon or unwanted menstrual symptoms back then. And they were very comfortable with touching a woman's yoni, telling her how to, and providing truly like a full body massage experience. Now, fast forward hundreds of years forward from that, what we've seen kind of resurrected from these history and texts kind of started, I'd say, primarily within the Tantra world, where yoni massage started to become more of a popular thing. And this is a bit of a controversial area because there's certainly been people and organizations in the Tantra world that have done this unethically. And, there's just been a lot of cases of it just being murky, crossing boundaries. And so it's kind of given like the word yoni massage a bit of a tainted name, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But also deriving from that, what we've started to see in the last, I'd say, 10 years is a resurrection of yoni mapping that's kind of come from the pelvic floor physical therapy world. So I'd say 15, 20 years ago, pelvic floor physical therapy really was not like a commonly known practice or like area of medicine or therapy. If you were going to one and if you could even find one, it was a bit of a shameful manner. And it likely was because, you'd recently had a child and maybe were having trouble like holding your bladder, you found yourself leaking a lot, and that was kind of the most common case that you would see. Fast forward to today, and especially working with, so many women in the birth and motherhood period of their life, everyone is talking about their pelvic floor physical therapist. Everyone has one, everyone's seeing them. And it's like become a really common, accepted, much less shame around it, part of transitioning into motherhood.
That's wonderful, isn't it?
Which is really wonderful, yeah.
Mm.
And also working with clients, of all different backgrounds, what I've come to find is that pelvic floor physical therapy is not still, at least in the US, covered by many insurance companies. It's very expensive, out of pocket, and even with partial insurance coverage. And that can leave women feeling like they're experiencing yoni symptoms, but there's just nowhere they can really go for help. They're afraid to touch themselves.
Or it's only for certain people of certain levels of privilege, and then so many other folks are just it's not accessible to them.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what I've seen over the last 10 years is even though we've gotten a lot more comfortable with these conversations about the changes that our body, specifically our yoni, goes through, the symptoms that can accompany the different life stages of womanhood, whether that's having a baby or menstruation or, kind of your early years exploring sex and your different sexual experiences, going through menopause, just all the things that come with having a woman's body. What I've come to find is that even though we're talking about all of this, most women are really terrified to touch themselves and don't feel like they have the power, the skills, or the knowledge to essentially either kind of heal and treat their own body or to understand what is going on so they have a better idea and clarity on where they need to go to seek help
Yeah.
rather than showing up at, a practitioner's office and just being like, help me, fix me. I feel completely broken. And I've had this experience personally, which has kind of started my own yoni mapping journey. But I will stop there to see if I answered your question about kind of the lineage and how we got from Taoism and Tantra all the way to pelvic floor physical therapy and yoni mapping today.
Yeah, you really did very thoroughly. And yeah, it's just beautiful to feel the progress that we've made and also to feel your passion for helping women and other folks with yonis to feel, yeah, safe and comfortable with bringing their own presence and physical touch to this beautiful, natural, wonderful part of our bodies. And I guess what was coming up for me when you were talking was just the shame that is around the menstrual cycle. And it's a huge part of what Red School is doing is to just de-shame the menstrual cycle. But yeah, that shame can also exist around this part of our bodies, the pelvic bowl, the yoni and our yonis. So yeah, that's what I was feeling and how beautiful it is that this work is helping to de-shame this area because it's just such a sacred, powerful, wonderful part of our bodies. And the more of us that can just slowly, gently, in a trauma-informed way, because the shame is there often because of trauma, whether that's personal trauma or just being woven into the collective trauma in that part of our bodies. So I think we have to pace ourselves here, don't we? We have to go gently. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's so much magic that happens and so much reemergence of our own power when we really start to know our bodies. What I've found personally is that a lot of times that shame that feels really stuck, those blockages that I'm like, how do I shake this from myself? The way that they begin to dissolve and soften begins with putting the power back into our own hands. And like you said, going at our own pace. You can't force massage your own yoni into softening and full body acceptance and love. Absolutely not. It's something that's done slowly, intentionally over time with a lot of presence. And it's just done completely at your own pace, not at your practitioner's pace, not at your partner's pace. yours completely.
Oh, beautiful. Could you carry on with where you were going before, your story of discovering this and how it supported you?
Yes, so it actually is very much intertwined with my cycle, which I always find really beautiful. As a teenager, when I got my period for the first time, when I experienced menarche, I was quite by the book about it. I was like, oh, I have these pads, I know what to do, like everything's fine. Shut off completely from the head down, all the emotions of the experience. And it was almost purely just like logic, like, I won't have any issues with this because I know what to do. And that theme kind of carried on through like all of my experiences of womanhood going forward. Any sort of like symptoms or acute conditions that came up with my yoni that I was experiencing, let's say like a yeast infection or something like that, I felt very much like put in point A, get point B. And it took me many years to learn that actually my body doesn't quite work that way all the time. And actually creating like true safety and confidence in my body doesn't come from just expecting it to be a certain way because they do a certain thing. There's a really beautiful complexity going on underneath the surface that's completely holistic in nature, mind, body, and soul. And I had to take years to really let all the emotions start to come up around my cycle, around the different things symptoms and conditions and experiences I had with my yoni, which for me felt really shameful or scary or that I didn't understand. So to be more specific, I don't think it's a coincidence that from age like 18 through the first few years of my early 20s, I struggled with chronic yoni infections. I didn't understand what was going on. I ate really well. I really took care of myself. And I was just like, why does this keep happening to me? I also experienced, like many, some pretty intense premenstrual symptoms, both the emotional side and also the actual physical symptoms. And then sex and pleasure was a complete anomaly to me. I didn't understand what was happening there. I didn't understand why I wasn't experiencing pleasure like I thought I would, and then why I was even having pelvic pain, in my earlier sexual experiences. And so for me, it felt like my yoni was just like this problem child of my body. And we were really at war for many years with each other, just kind of fighting to finally come into harmony. And I didn't understand her. She probably understood me because she's much wiser than me. But I completely I blew past her boundaries so many times, and I didn't know how to fully integrate her into my life. And later on, for me, this has personally become kind of like I didn't know how to fully integrate womanhood into my life because I actually didn't have many like older, wiser female or feminine mentors growing up. And so a lot of these initiations of womanhood, I really tried to sort out myself. And I typically my pattern was to do them from a very masculine frame of working.
Mm.
So with all of that, I slowly started to reclaim my rites of passage. The first one being with my cycle. And that's when I read Wild Power for the first time. And through that, I was like starting to be able to attune to the subtle energies of my cycle. I started my daily cycle awareness practice, and that like blew my mind all on its own. But through this, I was still having, all the other things like the chronic yoni symptoms. I was still experiencing pain with sex, like just feeling like I was not fully connected to my body, to my yoni in this way. And one day I just decided, I did go to a pelvic floor physical therapist, and this was in my late teens, maybe like 19, 20. And this is like way before anyone really was talking about pelvic floor PT. And so I felt so much shame going into the office to try to figure out what kind of was going on with the pelvic pain I was experiencing. And it was really helpful and informative. And I also came home and felt a bit broken after the appointment as well, because it just felt like I'm on this like really beautiful, complex, deep spiritual journey with my cycle. Why can't I have that with the actual physicality with my yoni?
Wow.
Um, the appointment with the pelvic floor PT, although super helpful, still left me feeling like there was just a depth that wasn't there. It's like the difference of your daily menstrual cycle awareness practice and like the whole framework you kind of learn in the red school, where you're really tuning into the emotional experience and how your inner landscape is shifting, versus like, oh, I just kind of eat different foods or move differently during the different phases.
Mm.
I kind of see yoni mapping similar, where you can go to the pelvic floor PT, or you can even go to someone for a yoni massage, and you receive that service, that experience, that education, and then there's the practice that you facilitate yourself, which is completely at your pace, and you feel complete safety to let all of the emotions from your touch, from your body, come up to be integrated, to be felt. And it's your experience, it's no one else's. And there's no goal or deadline for what your body needs to do by what time.
I'm going to pause my conversation with the wonderful Jules for a moment to share an invitation with you. So, as I mentioned earlier, Jules is a graduate of the Red School Menstruality Leadership Program, which is a 3-month immersion into the power and wisdom of the menstrual cycle. I took it myself in 2017. It was amazing. And as she will share a little later in our chat, one of her favourite aspects of the program, and me too, was the vibrant community that she found herself in the middle of and the quality of the space holding she experienced on the program. It's been called a life transforming experience, the deepest self growth of my entire life, and nothing short of a miracle. So you can read more stories from past graduates, you can explore the curriculum and see how the MLP could help you to step deeper into your leadership at menstrualityleadership.com. Yeah, the word safety came up a few times in your story. And personally, for me, with my story with this, it's, yeah, probably, I don't know, 12 years since I found Tammy Lynn Kent's book, Wild Feminine. And it just sang at me from the bookshelf. There's something about the cover. And I opened it and I saw, vagina massage and was like, wow, what is this? And the book, perhaps a bit like your experience with Wild Power, it helped me see how much pain I was in. And I couldn't contact, not physical pain, emotional pain. And I couldn't contact that pain because I had totally numbed myself. You mentioned your yoni knew you better than you knew your yoni, and that you had crossed her boundaries. And that's totally like my late teens and my early 20s was just, again, because I hadn't had that initiation, and most of us don't have initiation into our sexuality, from menarche and beyond. I just gave myself away and got myself in all kinds of, okay, I say got myself, that's interesting. I had traumatizing sexual experiences, and it was like, I can't really describe it, like I was kind of scarred emotionally in that area of my body. And, from one particular one where I was in a terrible relationship, which I've also spoken about on the podcast, and he was sleeping with lots of other women and brought sexually transmitted diseases back to me when I was just 18. I was so tender and like just new into this world. And I had a difficult experience going to the clinic, and it all felt so cold and clinical. And I just felt broken, like you said. I was just like, I felt so, yeah, like I'd been broken. So when I discovered the book, I realized, wow, I am holding so much pain in this part of my body. And I think it's helpful for both of us to share these stories, because the people listening, like, everyone's got their own story here. We've all got different twists and turns that we've been through in our lives, but I think our yonis and our pelvic bowls are holding a lot of our past experience. So as I started to, yeah, bring presence to that part of my body and bring touch to my vagina, it's just slowly but surely opened up the wealth of beauty and joy and intelligence that's here in this body that I had also numbed myself away from. I'd numbed the pain, but then in the numbing of the pain, I'd numbed all of that wisdom as well. And then my cycle awareness journey opened up. So it was concurrent for me as well. Yeah. So I think it would be great next to hear about something that you and I spoke about when we were preparing for this, which was the connection between nervous system health and the yoni and yoni mapping. Could you walk us into that?
Yeah, first I want to say thank you so much for sharing a bit of your story and how Tammy Lynn Kent's work really influenced you. She was a big influence for myself as well, in my whole kind of process of creating this as a practice in my life.
I'd also say we have a podcast episode with her. It's episode 92 if people want to listen.
It's a great one. I've heard it. Yeah, so the nervous system is definitely like kind of a hot word, right? In the last few years, but it's obviously always something that's been with us, like our cycles. Um, and I follow so many Instagram accounts, and I've been to lots of workshops in my like local area with everyone's different take on the nervous system. And something I feel like I haven't seen many people talking about is how the nervous system for the female body or for female physiology really is rooted in the yoni. The clitoris is the area of the body with the most amount of nerve endings. I think it's something over 9,000 nerve endings. And so, if we're talking about our nerves being fried or our nervous system being imbalanced or not feeling safety, why are we not talking about our yonis? This is like a question I've had in my mind a lot over the last few years. And I've had my yoni mapping practice, I mean, almost for a decade now. And for me, it's like when I have my practice, one of the first things I started noticing was just how soothed and grounded my system felt,
Yeah.
even from just a 5 to 10 minute practice. And I also want to make it really clear that yoni mapping is not necessarily like a self pleasure or masturbation practice. It doesn't always like if something becomes pleasurable and you kind of follow that thread, wonderful. But for me personally, most of the time it's much more exploratory and I'm just listening to what my body has to share, what sensations or emotions come up from the session. And so, yeah, with doing my practice like this, I noticed really early on that I felt almost similar to how I feel when I leave a yoga class or I have a meditation, any sort of like, kind of common nervous system regulating tool that, we often talk about today. Except really my yoni mapping practice felt like the most effective out of all of them and the most powerful. And I follow that today when I come back from a birth that feels like it really jolted me, even if it was a really beautiful, positive, smooth experience that I was attending. It's still quite an intense event on my energetic body and my overall nervous system. And I have my little routine where I take a shower, I use water to kind of like start to soothe and wash off the experience. And then I'll very often go into my yoni mapping practice, which, again, for some people, this might sound like, whoa, this is wild. What do you mean? But it is truly a tool to use to bring your body back to its center, and to really work with the various pressure points, acupressure points of the vagina, externally and internally. And so much of the tension that we hold in our pelvic bowl, like Tammy Lynn Kent says, is just really begging to be released, and it just needs our touch to do so. Most of us, I think, can also relate to the only times we touch our body are when we kind of have some sort of a sexual goal. So either we're touching our body with that sexual goal in mind, or our partner is, or we have some sort of symptom or condition going on and we're scared and full of fear. And so we're like looking in the mirror, crouching down, trying to figure out what's going on. And there doesn't seem to be a very regular in between for us.
Whereas
Um,
like our shoulders, we don't think twice about either massaging our own shoulders or asking someone else to massage our shoulders or like another part of our body. It's just interesting, isn't it? Because it's just another part of our body. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You give yourself a little back massage, or maybe you roll your wrist around and you kind of feel how your wrist is feeling, or your shoulders or your trapezius muscles, which really a common area to hold tension. And we just kind of do this throughout the day, like you said, without thinking about it, because we feel the tension and we instinctively feel that it needs to release. And then we feel lighter, we feel better, and we're like, wonderful, I'm carrying on with my day. But there's with our yoni, with this part of our body, there's so much stigma and externally, and then also our own internal stories about what it means to touch this part of our body, what it means to interact with it. And it just kind of gets in the way from us being able to have that kind of relationship with it. But truly over time, like you don't have to feel 100% comfortable or shame-free to begin the practice. The practice is what gets you to the other side. And like I said earlier, it really is about going at your own pace. And I thoroughly believe that every single woman, every single person with a yoni can have the experience of having a deep relationship with this part of their body where they really start to feel like their yoni is a wise compass, something they can trust, someone they can trust to help guide them through life. And it completely changes your view on walking through the world and just the way you experience day-to-day things. You're igniting your source of magic in your body.
Could you paint a picture of what it looks like, your yoni mapping practice? So what would it look like from start to finish?
Yeah, so I'll start with kind of giving my loose schedule. I keep things pretty intuitive, but I definitely don't go over a week without having a yoni mapping session. An average week will probably look like I do 2 to 3 15 to 20-minute sessions during the week. And then over the weekend, I might do kind of a longer, more in-depth session that's maybe up to an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, I'd say. And so for one of those shorter sessions, what that looks like is I like to do it in the afternoon, kind of in the middle of the day when I start feeling maybe like work stress piling on a bit. And I know that I just need to recenter myself and kind of feel back in my body. And I do it in privacy. I'll go into my bedroom, close the door, and I'll often start with a little bit of coconut oil, not a lot. And I'll just kind of cup the outside of my vulva with my hand and begin what I call yoni breathing, where I'm really sending my breath down into my uterus, my actual vaginal canal, like so inside of my yoni, and I'm feeling the muscles opening and contracting, expanding and contracting with my breath. So that's kind of my first way of getting my body's permission that it's ready to interact with me in this way. And some days I feel so locked up that my body doesn't do the expanding and contracting and doesn't want to really interact with my breath. And that's a day where that's really the extent of my practice. I just leave it at that, where I leave a hand cupped over myself. Most of the time, though, once I do a little bit of yoni breathing, I'll move into just kind of lightly massaging my pubic mound, the outer labia, and bringing a little bit of, positive blood flow into the area. And then I like to yoni gaze. So I'll bring like a handheld mirror and I'll just spend a minute or two kind of looking at my external anatomy and saying some positive affirmations to her. And then from there, I begin the internal practice. I want to say if you're someone that has a lot of like fear, resistance, or just some sort of like emotional blockage to touching yourself or, even entering yourself with your own finger, sometimes you can just start only working externally and spend a few weeks like that until you feel comfortable entering yourself. There's no rush in the process, and you shouldn't override your own boundaries in order to have the practice. And then internally, what the practice looks like is I'll start literally just around the very entrance of my yoni, so my vaginal opening, and I just kind of press the tip of my finger around in a clockwise motion, giving like 2 or 3 breaths to each spot. So I'm really feeling what sensations are coming up in that area. For a lot of people, this actually is a really highly sensitized part of the yoni where you feel a lot of like stinging or burning. But then what you find is by holding your finger there for a few breaths, the sensation starts to dissipate, which is really interesting. And then I'll go an inch deeper maybe, where I just bring my finger in slightly more and I do the same thing, working clockwise. And I'm doing this, working through the entire length of my vaginal canal until I reach my cervix. And then I guess it's kind of, I'll say advanced practice technique is when you feel like you're ready to interact with your cervix a bit, you can do the same thing where A lot of us have a visceral reaction to touching our cervix if it's something we've never done before, where it can feel nauseating or like a knot in your stomach or like this doesn't feel right, I shouldn't be here. But it's really amazing over time of just simply holding a finger on an area of your cervix and breathing some love and releasing some tension there in maybe even weeks. Your timeline's up to you and your body, but you really start to feel that visceral tense reaction turn into a softening, a loving sensation. And a lot of women, myself included, have had very like cosmic godly experiences with transforming that into like a pleasurable and beautiful sensation.
Yeah, I'm remembering back to a conversation I had with Olivia Bryant, who's the self cervix teacher. I don't know if you've come across her, but we had a great cosmic cervix conversation for anyone that wants to explore that. I'm kind of lucky in that when I had that horrible experience when I was 18, um, when they were examining me, they found a cyst on my cervix, which is benign and fine. But it means that for my whole life, I've had this relationship with my cervix because I check in with the cyst and see how it is. And then in that process, I check in with my cervix. So it was a blessing in disguise, or like my body calling me into myself somehow. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for walking us through that. Just for de-shaming it, for opening up the possibilities. And, I hope everyone listening can have a sense of, oh, maybe like even if it's maybe just starting with the yoni breathing, like how wonderful as an extension of our cycle awareness practice to just simply do that practice of cupping with love and then seeing if we can feel kind of map those proprioceptive maps, around our yonis and vaginas and uterus to feel how the muscles are moving is already a huge and beautiful act. And I'm thinking of something that Tammy said because I did her holistic pelvic care training, and the core thing that I took away was it's really your loving presence in that part of your body that does the healing. There's so many other benefits like the physical massage, releasing tension in the fascia and all of those, like there's so many, but and simply us bringing loving presence with no agenda to that part of our bodies is so profoundly healing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so beautifully said by yourself and by Tammy. Yeah, I also want to say too, I have had experiences where I've had like really bad menstrual cramps, or I was having like a acute yeast infection. And these are usually experiences in our life where we're like, we do not want to interact with our yoni or this part of our body. We do not want to look at her, touch her, feel her. But in my experience, I've had these moments and these healing stories where I like faced her head on in her pain, and I started my mapping practice, like in the middle of my bleed or in the middle of having an infection, and she started to open and soften and relax and feel safe.
Mm.
And I like resolved my yeast infection the next day. It really was amazing. And same thing with menstrual cramps. I don't get them so much anymore, but when I do kind of have an instance where I'm just feeling a lot of tension, my yoni mapping practice feels absolutely wonderful for that. There's the physical aspect where, of course, you're like relaxing the muscles in this area of the body, which kind of helps ease the edge of those cramps. But I also really believe there's this kind of like psycho-emotional, psycho-spiritual element of it too, where you really are sending love and care to your body, rather than as soon as you feel her causing some sort of discomfort, we separate. We say we don't want to be in relationship with you anymore. And it's like, well, what if in her pain or in this discomfort or in symptoms, you did decide to be in relationship with this area of your body? Then what might happen?
Yeah, like we've been it's actively been severed, this connection with our bodies, through the history of millennia for women. There are so many ways in which we've been uprooted. Like my friend Jules talks about how we're like root vegetables with our roots dangling in the air. We've been uprooted from our feminine practices or from our practices as women. And it's such a radical act for us personally, but for the collective to simply reconnect.
Absolutely.
I'd love to read something that you shared on Instagram because it's so poetic and so beautiful, and just hear how it lands in you today and if there's anything you'd like to add. So you said, in blood, in healing, in waiting, in stress, in inflammation, in sickness, in disconnection, your yoni is awaiting your touch. A yoni-led life can be confronting, easy to put off, or disguise itself as, quote, not your thing. But every woman's yoni is her thing. Every woman can be that kind of woman, the one who knows how her body works, who knows what her body needs, and who knows her body's edges of potential. I trust my yoni to always show me what I need to see, feel, or know. She is my guide and compass through life.
It sounds super, super wonderful being read by you too, Sophie. I would bet that that was written in my autumn.
Yes.
For yeah, I mean, I'm not superwoman. I don't have this like base of knowledge or experiences that's like so out of reach than the average woman. I am the average woman, you know, I just happen to attend births and have followed like my own personal fascinations with holistic women's health and the, you know, women's bodies and everything. And I need that reminder too, almost all the time.
Same. Yeah, this conversation is absolutely serving as a reminder to me, like, Sophie, come back to this part of your body, come home, come home. So thank you. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about your experience of the MLP. What called you? I mean, it's quite clear what called you, but if you could share in your own words, what called you to the program?
Yeah, so this was actually like a big move for me to decide to sign up for the MLP training. I Wild Power had been like a Bible for me, you know, always sitting on my nightstand. It was just a huge reference for me. It totally changed the way I was living my life over the past few years. And then it also marked a change for me where I really wanted to diversify what I was doing and the knowledge that I had. And I had at this point in time, I was already pretty tight with my cycle, I'd say. But I also just felt like there was more to go and deeper to go. And, you know, I knew there was more of a vocabulary that I could have. There was just deeper knowledge on how to hold space for others, kind of in the cycle realm, and it really enticed me. I always had seen the connection between the cycle and then the pregnancy, birth, postpartum transitions that we go through, and so it was like a natural extension to birth work as well for me. And from there, I think I got an email because I'd been on the Red School email list. And was this the first, was that the first MLP training that went on?
There were many in person, like 12 or 13 in person before it came online. And I think 2020 might have been the first online one and 2021 was the second, but I can't quite remember. I'm bad with time.
Okay. Well, yeah, it was, that makes sense to me. It was either the first or second online training that I joined. I remember it was like fairly new to be online. And I was like, oh, amazing. I remember there was a cycle coach that I followed that was a graduate of the in-person MLP training that I'd been following for a few years. And I thought, well, maybe I'd go to the UK one day and do the training. And yeah, when I started seeing it advertised online, I was like, yes, it's time. Like it feels right. It makes sense. It's available to me now fully. And then through the actual training, I mean, to me, the most profound thing about it was just being able to interact with that many women, people on a weekly basis and share these super vulnerable, intimate experiences about our lives and cycles, which is something I'd never experienced before. I think most of us haven't. And we just were having these conversations all the time about our inner worlds, our inner experiences with our cycle, and just the different like life stages and approaches to womanhood and taking care of ourselves and moving through our emotions. And I mean, that's a value you can't put money on, you know. It's like, how do you gather this many people in one place and have these kinds of conversations? Like, that's the ultimate preparation for learning how to hold space for others in this way. And then whatever way, you're trying to extend your own work.
Mm. How would you say that it has supported you in your leadership, or as you're bringing your calling out into the world in bigger and more beautiful ways?
Yeah, so there's the personal aspect of it, and then there's like the skill aspect. So with the skill part, it really has helped me in the way that I hold space for doula clients, which is, obviously highly intimate work, and everyone has their own experiences through pregnancy and birth and postpartum. And because I got exposure to so many different people's experiences in the program, I really noticed myself taking that with clients I work with today, of just really being able to sit, hold space, listen, reflect back without trying to like solve or interject. There's so many like, when you're a doula or you're working in the birth world or working with women in these ways, there's so many like intangible skills of the social interactions that we have and the connection that we have. And that was kind of an unexpected skill for me that I gained from the program.
Mm.
And then personally, I thought that I was pretty deep with my cycle awareness practice prior to that, but obviously the training just took it to another level, and I really learned how to hone in my cycle awareness in a way that really deeply supports my life and all of the projects and endeavors that I seek out and try to build on. And it's given me a lot more respect for my body and the way that I just want to do work in the world. I don't want to burn myself out or go past my boundaries. And I really respect the reserves of energy that my cycle creates for me. And I've noticed like in my friendships with other women or even like family members, I think sometimes I sprinkle a little bit on them and I see them blossom from like a tiny conversation that we have, which is always really exciting for me. Or people are like, well, why are you doing things this way? Or, oh, you're not coming out on your period. What do you do instead? And I love having those kinds of conversations, and I'm not afraid to have them anymore.
It just ripples out in incredible ways, doesn't it? It's like every woman, every person who's cycle aware, it's just slowly, magnetically, gently infusing out into their communities. It's so exciting to feel. So, wow, thank you. This has been such a rich conversation. Like I knew it was going to be amazing, and it's surpassed my wildest dreams. It's been wonderful to be with you, Jules. And I'd love to ask for people who love the way you're speaking and can feel like I can feel the depth of your practice and your experience here, and it's so inspiring to me. And so for people who are feeling that too, how can they connect with you? How can they connect with this work? How can they be guided in yoni mapping with you, by you?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram, Jules Alma, and my website, julesalma.com. There's actually a free intro to yoni mapping course. So if you'd like to kind of get started with, I think it's about 10 days of like a personal practice each day to slowly introduce you into how this can become a regular tool in your life, that's a really great starting place. And other than that, if you're based in Austin, Texas, I do attend births here.
Mm. Gosh, if I ever got pregnant again, I'd totally want to move to Austin so you could be my doula.
You're too
Um,
sweet.
I just want to recommend the 10-day course because I signed up for it when I knew that we were going to have this conversation. It is a very supportive, gentle way of like feeling like you're having your hand held as you're easing into this. So yeah, thank you for creating that. And thank you again for this conversation. Best of luck with all this beautiful, beautiful work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Sophie. I'm really touched.
Hey, thank you for listening all the way through to the end here. What a beautiful conversation. If you have a friend who you sense could benefit from the work that Jules is sharing from this conversation, please share the podcast with them. Please get in touch with me if there's anyone that you'd love me to be in conversation with, any themes that you'd love us to explore. And that's it for this week. So I'll be with you again next week. And until then, keep living life according to your own brilliant rhythm.